Thank you for joining our webinar, Safe Learning Environments, Nurturing Student and Staff Well-Being Through Thoughtful Safety Strategies. We'd like to share a few housekeeping items before we begin. All of your phones are muted for the duration of the call. You can ask a question or post a comment in the chat window. Please take a look for the chat window now and feel free to introduce yourself, and please say where you're from in the chat. This webinar will be recorded and sent to all registrants, plus it will be posted on the AASA website. The webinar is also being streamed on Facebook Live. AASA is pleased to bring you this webinar with CENTEGIX, which is dedicated to the mission of creating safer spaces by innovating technology to empower and protect people. CENTEGIX is committed to creating safer spaces where all staff feel supported to call for help in any kind of emergency, from the everyday to the extreme. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Jim McVetti, Managing Partner of First Step Advisors. Jim and First Step Advisors deliver strategy, communications, and executive growth services to education providers worldwide. Jim's published research, strategic consulting, and embedded client engagements have fueled the growth of hundreds of companies across the education industry. Through First Step, Jim and his team advise global brands, early mid-stage innovators, and leading investors that share a commitment to improving educational outcomes. Take it away, Jim.
Thanks so much, Lee. And thanks so much to the membership at AASA. What a powerful organization. And we're so glad to be here as part of the community. As Lee said, my firm works with a range of companies in this space. And in fact, just a little opener, I'm here in New York City for an EdTech conference. You hear from vendors like the ones in the room down the hall every day. And in fact, this conference has nothing short of about 500 companies represented. What I find most fascinating is that there hasn't been a single conversation yet in this entire conference about the topic we're going to cover today. And it's a topic that you as district leaders think about every day, multiple times a day. So I'm really pleased to be stepping out of that world and into this one. And I'm joined by an august panel, including Dr. Philip Brown from Jackson County School System in Georgia, and Dr. Andrew Dolliff from Yarmouth School Department in Maine. Andrew, Philip, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Jim.
Let's talk a little bit about the agenda today. And I'd like to echo what Lee said, which is I see some folks joining in the conversation. I see Sarah from North Carolina and Tara from Maryland. Looks like one of your neighbors up in Maine has joined us. And I see Sarah from New York. So please continue to introduce yourself, because it really is a community and we all have a stake in making this community what it is. Today's agenda is going to basically cover what we're talking about right now. Quick introductions. We'll learn more about our distinguished panelists. And then we're going to learn from them about the connection between safety, well-being, and trust, the key ingredients to building a safe learning environment. We'll start with looking at the teacher and student well-being phenomenon or challenge that's happening here in the K-12 space. We'll look at safety, and then we'd like to hear some specific strategies. You're going to walk away with a lot of data, a lot of information that the production team has put together for this panel. And yes, you will have an opportunity to access this recording later on this week. So let's dive right in. And I see everyone else joining in. That's great. Folks from New Jersey, from Arizona, Minnesota, and another from New York. Let's talk, though, about our panelist from Georgia. Take it away.
I'm Philip Brown. I'm the proud school superintendent of the Jackson County School System. I've been on the job 17 months. I'm going to start counting them as months because they feel like years. I'm sure you saw in that picture. I didn't have all of this gray hair when I started this job 17 months ago. Previous to this, I was a high school principal and a middle school principal and a middle school math and science teacher. Our school district is one of the fastest growing school districts in Georgia. We opened a new middle school this past August, and we'll open a new elementary school in August of 2024 with plans to build 3 additional schools in the next 5 years. And so a growing space on the 85 corridor outside of Atlanta and north of Athens. So a great place to live and work and raise a family.
Philip, thanks for that background. I should mention to those of you viewing in from your home or home offices or in the school districts you serve. I have the panelists up on screen, but I got to tell you, I take a lot of notes. And even in just the prep for this, I've got pages of notes. So if you see me looking down, I'm taking notes because I'm really keen to hear from these experts and really capture my takeaways. One of which is, Philip, you echo a thing I hear from districts all across the South, which is a high rate of growth and no shortage of challenges, especially as you think about new buildings. And really maintaining a safe learning environment is going to be key. It's not just about the four walls and a roof anymore. It's really about creating this safe environment. Andrew, I'd love to hear a little background from you. You're our neighbors to the north up in Maine.
Thanks, Jim. Andrew Dolph. This is my 10th year actually as superintendent of schools in Yarmouth, Maine. We're just outside of Portland, a couple hours north of Boston. We have about 1,700 students this year across 4 schools. Proud that a couple of our schools have recently been recognized as Blue Ribbon Schools of Excellence. We just recently had to renovate and expand all 4 of our schools because, although not to the extent that Phil was talking about down in Georgia, we are a growing school district in the suburbs of Portland. This is my 15th year overall as a superintendent. Like Phil, I was a high school principal prior to this, started my career teaching and coaching 37 years ago. So a lot of what I share today won't be based on any expertise that I have, but merely a lot of observations that I've made over nearly 4 decades.
Well, and thank you both for your service. One at 15 and one at 17 years. That's a good run. And your districts are lucky to have you. One comment, which is what I like about the districts that you two represent, different sizes, different parts of our great country, but a lot of the same issues that you're up against. And I think that shouldn't be lost on anyone here, whether you're joining from Texas or Minnesota or New York. I see more folks signing in. A lot of these issues hold true, whether you have a fixed set of schools that you're renovating and expanding, or you're starting to add to your campuses in your community. The issues today are really germane to everyone in education. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the connection between well-being, safety, and trust. That's the organizing framework for today's conversation, and looking at how all 3 impact the overall success of your teachers and the kiddos that they care about. So let's start with teacher well-being. And I think it's important that we really ground the conversation in facts and figures. So much of the national narrative, or even the narrative in your communities, whether it's at school board meetings or in emails, is driven by passion. It's driven by almost a feverish state that some members of the community find themselves in when it comes to their student safety. And I say that honestly, as a parent of 3 students who are in middle and high school, I get pretty feverish about their safety and their well-being. But let's talk about teachers first. Interestingly, before the pandemic, 61% of teachers said their jobs were often stressful, which is more than double the rate of non-teachers. And 58% said they had poor mental health. Now, you were both teachers and school principals. Are these relatable stats in your own experiences, guys?
I would say yes. And with as fast as technology is changing, and that students and teachers have access to technology, school districts are a microcosm of what we see in society. And so it is stressful. And I like to say we're in the people business, and that makes it challenging as well, because people come to work with, and they bring their personal lives with them to work. And so those are just some variables that make it challenging and definitely stressful for teachers.
Yeah, and the I guess the surfeit of technology that's been introduced in our schools hasn't really quieted down this stress piece, has it, Andrew?
No, I think it's obviously magnified it, and you can't even start talking about technology without immediately going to the social media discussion and how that's impacting schools and students, but also staff. As we're talking about here, recently we're seeing staff members that are facing a great deal of criticism on social media. People are going to that platform rather than coming to supervisors or speaking to those of us who may be able to have some influence on a situation. And that's incredibly stressful for folks. They feel influenced by social media and those stressors. And of course, we're working with families' most valued commodities, which are their children. And so they're obviously going to be much more emotional and vested in those conversations. So there is a great deal of stress for folks on the front lines in these positions.
And it's really not getting easier. As you mentioned, we have new ways to make it harder on teachers to feel safe and secure, not the least of which is social media. And in an update to this study, it looks at 3 out of 4 teachers. And interestingly, an even greater number of principals cite frequent job-related stress. You two were both building level leaders. And I would say that the stress continues to magnify and the numbers continue to go up. So I guess, Andrew, how do you start to talk to teachers about this? First, by acknowledging what they're feeling, and then what happens?
Well, I think absolutely, it's around conversations and support and trying to find ways to alleviate some of that stress. And there isn't a lot that we can do in the education field to recognize and support staff in terms of financial rewards and so forth. But we can look at ways to try to take some things off their plates. We're always adding things to people's plates. And I think, looking for ways to provide them with the time that they need, professional development, opportunities to interact with one another. But most importantly, having a say in matters that are of importance to them. We really believe one of our core values, in fact, part of our mission statement is empowering others. And we really believe that from the district office down to the classroom level, that our employees need to be empowered. And when they're empowered, they feel more vested in the organization, they feel safer, they feel healthier, they're more productive. And so I think those conversations that you're talking about are key to helping people have that sense of ownership and satisfaction.
Philip, I think Andrew brings up a really important point about empowerment, and you're not going to disagree with him. I know that much. So give me an example of how in your district you've started to, foster a greater sense of empowerment among your faculty and staff.
Well, I think one way is making sure the lines of communication are open at whatever level you're working at, feeling like you have a voice and you're able to use that voice, whether that's a bus driver, whether that's a school food nutrition employee, making sure that people feel like they can share their opinions and that they can be involved in the decision-making process, I think is really important. I talk about with our folks a lot about treating people as professionals. And we have a responsibility to treat each other as professionals, to model that not only for our community, but model that for our students. And so we have structures in our district like parent advisory, teacher advisory, student advisory committees that allow those individuals to have conversations with different people. And also empowering folks when we go into faculty meetings of saying, stop me in the hallway and ask a question, and don't feel like you're going to be dismissed based upon whatever job you serve and whatever role you serve in our school district. I think another point is at the high school level, oftentimes teachers and administrators, they get to see the student walk across the stage at graduation. And just reminding folks in K-5 and 6-8 schools that they're pushing kids to a different level, and that graduation is on the horizon. And seeing that end result at graduation as a high school principal and a superintendent, you think about all the range of emotions walking across that stage for that student, but also for us as educators who've helped them. And I think that fulfillment and that I almost call it intrinsic motivation to see that kid be successful is very powerful.
I like the idea of really starting to name intrinsic motivation here as a way to foster this idea of feeling safe, secure, but also knowing what the end goal is. Two things in what you just said, Philip, that resonate with me. One is, fun fact, I am a part-time backup bus driver in my community. So I run a company and I work with education providers all over the world. But the truth is, like most districts, we're short on bus drivers. So every once in a while I get behind the wheel. So thanks for acknowledging us. And school, nutrition specialists. There's a lot of folks here that do need to feel empowered. And in some cases, it starts with feeling like they haven't been forgotten. So a quick acknowledgement there. The other thing, Philip, is that you said, hey, stop me in the hallway and ask a question. And I love the precise nature of that empowerment. It isn't just like, hey, catch me sometime if you need anything. It's stop me in the hallway. You gave someone context, a specific space where they can envision actually doing that. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of us who are in leadership positions, which is don't just say call if you need something, but be precise. And I think that's really powerful. So you started to answer this question, which is why are teachers so stressed? And in the layperson's vernacular, they might say, well, that's what they signed up for. They didn't do it for the money. If they wanted to make money, they shouldn't be a teacher. But I think that's not fair, especially when a word like trauma is so often associated with being an educator. But there's two other comments in here. And Andrew, I'd point to you to talk about this, how these hit you, these second bullets in particular, secondary traumatic stress and battle fatigue. Those don't feel like hyperbole anymore when we think about education, do they?
No, I think they're very real and practically tangible. And how we try to provide support for this is through collegial interactions and providing people with the opportunity to share with one another what their stressors are and how they're proposing to handle those and recover from those. I think that teachers spend so much time addressing these with students that they often don't take care of themselves. I think one of our lead responsibilities as school administrators and school leaders is to ensure that our teachers, or for those of us that are superintendents, to ensure that our building level leaders, our principals and assistant principals and athletic directors and so forth, are taking care of themselves and are finding ways to share what's going on in their lives and in their minds with one another or with other people who can empathize and maybe help them recover a bit from it. But collegiality plays a big role there in helping people kind of step out of always being in the role of the one to help others and maybe looking for some help for themselves.
There's a comment in here from Laura who talks about how true your statements are, Andrew. But it's also true for administrators. Philip, I'd welcome you to comment on that, where, the folks in this room are an often neglected group. Philip, let me say it this way. How are you going to heed Andrew's advice and take care of yourself? And I mean that.
So I am married to an elementary school principal. And Catherine and I, she's in a neighboring district. I'm not her boss. She's the boss.
You were never going to be her boss.
Yeah, exactly right. And we also have 4 small children. We have ranging in age from 12 to 19 months. And that grounds me. And I think it helps me when a teacher may be running late and runs in 5 minutes right before school starts because they had to drop their kid off at daycare and the daycare employees were late and it caused a stressful situation. Showing empathy in those kind of situations. And then also understanding how to, I call it borrowing time. A lot of my work is done after the kids go to sleep. And so that I spend the precious time that I have with them, whether that's early in the morning or late in the evening, with them, and then try to borrow time by getting work done. But also understanding that there are going to be times where things aren't always perfect, and depending on your team, learning how to delegate, learning how to work collaboratively with individuals, setting expectations, and so setting some parameters for yourself. And there are days where this is a family day on a weekend day that I'm going to spend and devote it with my family. I think is important to have those parameters in your own life and to set that example for other leaders as well.
Well, I'm glad you do that. I'm also glad you're still under the illusion that sleep is a reality. I don't see that in your world right now if you have 4 kids from 12 to 19 months. But you know what? You live that delusion for as long as you can. I'm very impressed. Um, One thing that occurs to me is no one understands what it's like to be a teacher in the way another teacher can. And that holds true for building principals, administrators, and of course, the select group of superintendents in there. How do you convey the need for self-care at every level, from staff to faculty to building leaders to your own level? How do you convey that need, that importance up to, your school board who represent the community? And a lot of them were not educators at any point. Andrew, how do you start to do that?
Well, I'm very vocal about it, and I try to model it, Jim. And I wrote about this a bit in my book that you're going to highlight a little bit here later on in the presentation. But I think that, we have to be very intentional in how we communicate the need for these things and in how we address the activities, our schedule that allows us to have a balanced lifestyle. I think that it's important for school leaders to have those conversations with their school board if they're working at that level, with their administrative team, with their building leadership teams. And so really from the first day of school, when we have a grand opening ceremony, like a lot of folks do, we talk about how to care for yourself, how to schedule intentionally, how to make the most of those days when you have required evening meetings, how to limit those days when you have 12, 14-hour days, piggyback scheduling, morning meetings. So we put it right to practice in our district and try to find ways to be more efficient in our use of time. Because that's the commodity. That's what people say there isn't enough of, right? If people aren't getting enough exercise, if people aren't eating right, if people aren't reading the type of literature that they want to read for pleasure, it isn't because they don't have access to those things. It's because they don't have time to access those things. And so we're always looking for ways to, as Phil said, steal some time from yourself and be more intentional about how we schedule our days.
Yeah. And Phil, you're really doing some of what Andrew says. You're modeling how to take care of yourself, and you're modeling for your team. How you stay grounded. I love the word intention in there, and I kind of like the word limits, like setting limits and expectations, but then modeling that for your staff. Forgive the mispronunciation to our guest who offered up a comment about the disconnect that some stakers can feel, but also there's specific ways that this person talked about, low stakes yet high yield strategies that can remedy that disconnect. So others should feel free to share that, to see that comment and build upon it, or build upon the themes that Andrew and Phil are sharing here in the conversation today. Thanks so much for this perspective. Let's take a look at students here. This is no surprise. I mean, the pandemic has taken a clear and significant toll on students' mental health. I don't think we need a stat, but it's there if you want it. And there's a quote from the NCES commissioner. But what are you seeing, Phil? What are you seeing in your schools how's this playing out in your schools?
So I think when many of us went to school, then we went home, and there was a disconnect between school and home in the sense that you could get disconnected. Technology has created an environment where kids can't get away from time to time. I think that is an issue. And Andrew mentioned social media. I think there are pressure that's on kids today more than ever, whether that's what they're supposed to look like based on pictures that they see on Instagram, or whether they see pictures on social media where everybody looks happy 100% of the time, not really understanding that there is emotions in life and there are ups and downs. And And so trying to help kids understand that and grow is really important. But not only do we see this with students, we also see this with our employees as well.
Yeah, it's just really hard. And this is a continuing theme about how the way we're living our lives, and we can't blame it all on social media for sure, but it does create this connective tissue between how we spend our hours outside of school, and that finds its way back into schools. And even in a small district, in a bucolic community of Portland, it's lovely up there, but yet the stressors find their way into your classrooms too, right, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. And, I mean, we've all, remember back into, psychology 101 when we were looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and, the psychological needs are at the bottom of that pyramid, and so those needs aren't being met. There's no way students can reach that highest level of self-actualization. And so we've certainly seen ourselves hiring more social and emotional staff, from school psychologists to ed techs that are providing support, paraprofessionals that are providing support to students in and out of the classroom, but certainly more counselors, school counselors, social workers, guidance counselors, substance abuse counselors, to try to address those needs so that students can learn.
I mean, look at the three most common types of mental health services. Individual counseling, sometimes offered up through even telehealth, case management, and then referrals out. And I'd say for our community who's participating in this webinar from around the country, including I saw someone from Alaska. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming all this way. It's good to have this data to say, hey, we're not alone in this. And so when you're, building a case to the community about why we need to invest more in this isn't an isolated incident. It's happening north, south, east, and west. And it's a pretty big deal. I want to shift the conversation a little bit. Under the auspices entirely of creating a safe learning environment, I mean, safety is a factor. I mean, it's not just about well-being, of course, but feelings of safety, order, discipline, they're all predictors of teacher turnover. Basically, what I take from this, if a teacher doesn't feel safe, then we're more likely to lose them. How does this resonate with you as leaders? This idea of, we're talking specifically about safety now. Philip, I'll point to you.
Go ahead, Philip.
I think in any job, feeling safe is so important. When it comes to being able to work at your highest potential, when people are worried about safety, order, discipline, it creates fear. It creates fear not only in the staff, it creates fear in the community. And it's tough for things, productive things to happen in classrooms if there's not a feeling of safety, not only with teachers, but also students.
And, there's research behind this, Jim. So, Paul Zak from Claremont University, he's a neuroscientist, neuroeconomist, and he has actually studied the brain and in the workplace, helped us understand that if you're feeling safe and you're in a high trust environment, there are different chemicals released into the brain, and those workers in those environments where they feel safe and where they have a great sense of trust and leadership, they're more productive. They come to work. They have fewer sick days. They have a greater level of satisfaction in their work and in their home life. And why would we think that wouldn't apply in schools? Not only to our teaching staff, who are professionals, just like the individuals that Professor Zak was studying, but also for our students, who are also human beings. So we know when we provide a safe, high trust environment, people are more engaged and they're more productive. And that's what we need to aim for in our schools.
And I think you're right. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, later on in this presentation, we reference Zak. But what you're talking about is really critical for what we're up against. I mean, 1 in 4 teachers fear for their safety in schools. And that can be, as we heard at the outset, from the everyday to the extreme. The everyday, things like students misbehaving or having verbal altercations, all the way up to the most extreme fears. Now, I want to connect this back to a theme, and I told you I would take a lot of notes, which is the idea of empowerment. And I think, Andrew, you introduced it, and then Philip, you gave us some examples. Given what we see here about the fear of the everyday issues and the extreme, can you give me an example? I'll start with you, Andrew, of how you deliver empowerment to your faculty and staff?
Specifically related to school safety?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, they're certainly engaged in the conversations around our training protocols and our emergency response protocols. We've changed those over the last few years, as many schools have, looking at a lot of the different national programs that are out there, from the ALICE program to I Love You Guys, and working with our local emergency responders. So certainly providing them with a voice in how we're going to respond in the event of a potentially catastrophic situation, but also engaging them in the work that's done ahead of time. And we know that not all threats to schools come from within the schools, but many times a threat to the school comes from somebody who's known to the school. And so we know that relationships are the most important preventative measure in those situations. So getting to know your students, making sure that every student in the school has somebody that they feel connected to. And so our staff are very engaged in developing programs through our advisory at the middle school and high school level, and through our homeroom morning meeting groups at the pre-K through grade 5 level. So they're involved in those conversations. They're involved in the curricula that we share with students, and we empower them to speak with counselors and administrators in the school when they identify a student who may be in need. But then I think also, and it's appropriate that CENTEGIX is the one sponsoring this webinar, and I'm not being paid to say this, but I think that the rapid alert system that CENTEGIX provides and our staff now has is empowerment as well. It provides every individual in the district, bus drivers, school nutrition workers, teachers, counselors, administrators. Everyone in the district has the ability to instantly call for assistance and notify the proper level of authorities, be they school authorities or public safety officials, when they feel that there is an unsafe situation.
Yeah, there's so many important threads to pick at there. Working backwards to your point about putting the power of rapid response in the hands of all your faculty and staff is almost the definition of empowering. So I appreciate you giving that example, but I also appreciate and would invite you, Phil, to comment on this, which is in so many conversations when we talk about school safety, and I've had a lot of them here with both with AASA and other venues talking to district leaders, the communities want to rally around cameras. They want to rally around security detectors, using AI for any number of reasons, basically cordoning off the campus and making it harder. But I got to tell you, the thing that really struck me is you led with relationships, Andrew. And Phil, I see you nodding, because I think you picked up on that too. And you said that's really the most important thing about a safety plan. And I wonder if we kind of forget that sometimes out in the community. Phil, please just pick up where I'm going. I think
here. Relationships, they leveraging those to help schools stay safe can never be underestimated. When I was a principal, there was 2 faculty meetings, one as a middle school principal, one was a high school principal. Same activity. I took a note card and I wrote every kid's name in the school on each note card, and I put them around the cafeteria, and I gave the faculty 15 minutes to write whatever they wanted to write about each kid they could inside of our school. At the end of 15 minutes, I walked around and all I did was pick up the note cards that didn't have anything written on them. And I took that stack and I showed our teachers and our staff, these are kids that I only gave them 15 minutes. So there were going to be some that didn't have anything written on there, but these are the kids in our school that we don't know. And how sad is it that we as a school community don't know every one of our kids at a very high level. And I think that relationships are the core of keeping schools safe. The more we can build those relationships, not only with our students, but with our parents in our community, and leverage those relationships to work together. I think Andrew's point about, organizations like and companies like CENTEGIX, and being able to use those and empower folks with, it doesn't matter, what position you hold in our district, you can lock it down. You can lock our schools down, and we can call public safety officials. I think sends a strong message and empowers them to make decisions to work together.
Well, gosh, I mean, what an amazing exercise to go through with those cards. One I hadn't heard of, but others may have done something similar. And I'd invite folks in the chat to offer up their own ideas, who may be inspired by Phil's example of physically indicating, hey, these kids are not known to us, and they should be. I mean, that's really important, because the studies have shown over time that students aren't feeling safe. They just simply aren't feeling safe. And that could be physically unsafe through bullying, or maybe just feeling vulnerable, which leads to a heightened sense of anxiety. And then that surfaces in all of the kinds of referrals for different care that they have to have. And so I want to start then and give us plenty of time to start thinking about trust. Oh, and here it is from Dr. Paul Zak. Andrew, you talked about this actually. So I think it's just so appropriate that that here it is about, we talk about building trust by building physical and psychological safety. So we're building some connections between well-being, between the idea of safety. At the end of the day, if you do that right, and you've come by it authentically, you're going to achieve this thing which we all really want, which is trust. Talk more about this element here, Andrew, please.
Yeah, I think it's the most important element in school success, and in school leader success. I say that, trust is the make or break characteristic in a school leader's career. It might determine their longevity even in the position. And, so ours really begins at the student level early on. When I think about the high school in particular, our students have an advisory period that they go to every day for 4 years. They have the same advisor, so that they have an individual who works those 8 to 10 students, who gets to know them on a very personal level, so that hopefully when our principal hands those cards out, like Philip did, there's a lot of information written about each student, because we've been intentional about it. And it begins down at the elementary level as well with our, we don't call it advisory at that level, but we call it morning meeting. So I think, being intentional around your scheduling and how you're going to interact with the students. But, it also begins before they enter the school building each day. We tell our bus drivers, you're the first adult contact with the school department every day, and how you greet those students and how you are present while you're driving them around the district is important. And we expect our students to be greeted at the schoolhouse door every day. And, this isn't Georgia. So February, it's not going to be comfortable standing out there greeting those students, but we expect it to be done still. And then from the time they enter the school, ensuring that our staff are present where students gather. And, that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear. But I think it's incredibly important for educators to know how critical it is for them to be present in places where students gather or where students pass, in the hallways between periods or passing from one program to another, in the cafeteria, in the gymnasium during a free period, whatever it may be. Being present is so important when you imagine the younger student, the smaller student, who's entering this space where there are, dozens or maybe hundreds of adolescents that are bigger than them or louder than them, or, the energy is there. And if there's no adult presence, that's an intimidating place. That's a scary place. And so not just making those interpersonal connections, but simply being present provides students with a level of trust that this school is a safe place for me to be.
It's so important. And when I think about this comment about, if I don't have enough space in my brain where I feel safe, I'm not ready to learn. I feel like that holds true. If I don't feel safe as an educator, I'm not ready to teach. Philip, keep talking about ways that you've been building trust. You've already given us some amazing examples. And I'd just love to hear more about how you're going about this.
So word I use a lot is culture. The culture of a school district, the culture of a school. How do people feel, whether that's students, teachers, parents, or community members? How do people feel when they walk into your school? Because I think that that gives your school an identity, that gives your district an identity. And so not only do we want our schools to be places of higher learning, we also want them to be places where our students and our staff feel comfortable. They feel like they can take chances and risk in their job, or as students, that they have the opportunity to express themselves. At the same time, I think as educators, we have a responsibility to partner with our parents and partner with our teachers, so that we can find success with our students. Another part is mentoring. Andrew's mentioned it through advisement, through morning meetings. Mentoring is a space where I think we can continue to explore, whether that's using community members to come in and help mentor our kids, or use our own staff to serve as mentors for students is really important.
There's just no shortage of opportunities. I mean, you're talking about, so Andrew, you kind of picked up on this like the spaces between, and Phil, I think you would agree that that's where a lot of the culture shows up too. So every classroom has its own culture, but also how does that feed into the cafeteria or the hallways or at assembly or in the bus? I mean, all of that really is present and such an important factor. Here's another interesting quote, and I would again remind our audience that having data like this that we fold through, or quotes from researchers, is really good for building not only your own aptitude in this area, which is why you come to events like this, but also when you need to build the case, when you need to set direction for your community stakeholders, whether it's parents or board members or the community at large. I mean, making connections about how we elevate academic expectations and their direct corollary to student safety, to student well-being, and to trust, and likewise with teacher safety, well-being, and trust. I mean, all of these are such important factors, including creating safe spaces among students. Here's this word again, which is empowerment. But here's the thing, I really love the word nurture here. Phil, talk about the word nurture in the context of the things you're doing to build trust. I mean, nurture just feels like such a keyword in this whole thing. And it's funny that it's in the title of the session and it's just showing up here again now. So I don't know, disassemble that word for me in the context of all that we're talking about, this idea of nurture.
So I think, as Andrew and I were talking about the importance of teachers and staff members building relationships with students, as leaders, we have a responsibility to build relationships with our staff, to get to know them, not only on a professional level, but on a personal level, to help support them and support them through their jobs each and every day, and to build bridges with them, to let them know that we care, and that we're with them and that we want to support them. You build trust, I think, consistency over time, and predictability in your decision making as a leader, following through on commitments, making sure if you say you're going to be somewhere that you're there, and that just nurtures the relationship over time, and builds trust. And then listen to understand. I think as leaders, sometimes we think we have all the answers, and we're better off when we're quiet and we just listen. We learn a lot.
Yeah, I guess you never stop learning, even if you're at the top of the pyramid in our learning hierarchy. You're constantly learning. I think that's fascinating. And again, I'm on like page 8 of notes here because what's really hitting me is I'm running a company with my team happens to be dispersed across the country, but some of these elements that you're talking about and how you build trust and you nurture empowerment, including through things like Phil said, listening to understand, being consistent and predictable. These are actually really good leadership lessons. I feel like everyone should be leaning in on this. So I'm really grateful. Andrew, I'd love to hear a little bit about your book, and you're a pretty humble guy, so you probably don't want to be put on a spot like this, but here I go, because I find the idea of the trust imperative and practical approaches to effective school leadership, you both just offered some up. And so talk about some of the themes that are in your book. And I would invite the community to go find your way to getting a copy yourself. Andrew, tell us what we might expect.
Well, thanks, Jim. I would mention a couple of things. You know, when you're talking about building trust and empowering others, I think that one of the first things that you must make sure your organization, your school has is a clear mission and a clear set of core values, and that those have been collaboratively developed, that they're clearly communicated, you know, that they're widely accepted. Because when you have that, you know, studies show when you have a clear mission, clear set of core values, there's less conflict in the organization. And when there's less conflict, there's a greater sense of safety and a greater level of trust. So I think that's one of the first things that I would talk to. And the other thing is, you know, I teach at the graduate level, and that's where a lot of these ideas came from. As Philip just said, we're constantly learning, regardless of how long we've been in the organization or what our position is. And I learn from my graduate students as they write papers around leadership, and it's really helped me to kind of hone my belief about this. But you know, I really believe that one of the first steps that we can take to build trust in our organization and in our leadership is to demonstrate trust in others. When we are micromanaging, when we are controlling all of the decisions and the conversations, when we stop being curious as leaders, then we're going to start to degrade the trust that others have in our ability to lead. So I would just say, you know, that the book that I wrote is really around practical approaches, because I felt that there was a voice missing in the literature by and large. And I just wanted to add to those voices. And the voice that was missing is the voice of the practitioner. There are a lot of voices out there that are researchers, and they provide us with a lot of great data and information and ideas. And so I don't offer my book up as something in place of those folks. I offer it up as something in addition to, and it's just the perspective of somebody who's watched a lot of leaders do things well and seen some leaders make some mistakes, including myself over the past 35 years.
Yeah, we can't help but bring our own human condition to every role we're in, what teacher, leader. We always have mistakes that we can learn from. But we also have successes we can build upon. Phil, let me turn to you as we start to wrap up this idea of that, you know, when safety leads, success follows. But I'm kind of curious, you know, when you hear Andrew talking about the practical approaches, which is really important, and the voice of the practitioner in here, how do you know it's working? Give me some things that we could think about to say, yep, we've measured this, we know it's going to have an impact, and the proof's in the pudding. What are some things that come to mind when we talk about measuring success?
So I think there are a lot of data points we can look at. One of the things that we did here, we implemented CENTEGIX a couple of years ago, and we really didn't have a smooth process for what happens when you have a staff alert. So how do you go through that process? But then how do you educate teachers? So for our schools, for example, if there's a staff alert at a school and the CENTEGIX button gets pressed, we have a safety and security coordinator who automatically goes and watches a camera and can tell exactly what's happening in that moment. And then how do we communicate among staff members appropriately? And I think just measuring our response time and measuring our ability to communicate with each other I mean, you can look at it from a quantitative standpoint. I'm looking at it from a qualitative standpoint, in that I'm watching us communicate better. I'm watching us respond more appropriately. That's just a simple example of putting a process in place, and watching your people feel safer because you have that process in place. And on the back end of that, we brought our teachers and our staff in so that they can see how we respond when we have those emergencies, so that they can feel more comfortable that, okay, if this button gets pressed, this is how our district leadership, this is how our school leadership is going to respond. This is how our team at our school is going to handle this situation. And then it just builds trust. Because once it happens and they see that we're going to follow that process and that we're not going to panic, I think it sends a message of in belief in each other.
Well, and it really is consistent with your theme earlier, as I took my notes here, about being consistent and in some ways being predictable. So in the course of training your staff on how to use an incident response system, you show them what will happen. And now they have the ability to predict what's going to happen if they push that button or take some other protocol. So I appreciate that example. That's actually really powerful. Andrew, how are you seeing, and it doesn't have to be with respect to incident response, but maybe some of the other themes that we're talking about as well, in terms of leveling up our well-being, our feeling of safety, and that building of trust. How are ways that it's working?
Well, we're pretty consistent at conducting surveys with our staff to evaluate different programs, and even ourselves as school leaders. Our school principals and assistant principals provide opportunities for staff to respond to surveys about their performance. And in those surveys, we include questions around empowerment. Do you feel that you have a voice in matters that are important to you? Do you feel that you've been heard? How do you evaluate the decision-making processes at your school? So I think it's important to provide folks with those anonymous opportunities for providing some feedback into the work that we're doing as school leaders. And that, that allows us to hold ourselves accountable as well. And we share the results with the staff. So while they're responding individually, we share the results with the staff so that they know that we are reading what they're sending to us, and they're able to see what other folks are saying about the leadership as well. And I think that really provides people with a strong sense of empowerment and trust. And it seems to be, the data that we're getting from those surveys would indicate that people are growing more trustworthy or maintaining a high level of trust and feeling empowered in the schools.
Yeah, and those surveys are kind of a scalable way to listen to understand. Just these themes keep popping up that are really important, and you're giving us practical ideas about how to make them a reality. I think in school districts like yours, and the thing we aspire to in school districts across the country, is to accept that there are going to be some questions about how will we overcome this, what's going to happen now, and that might be, how do we overcome the feeling of insufficient safety or vulnerability, or what's going to happen if I push this button. But what you've been able to affect through the work that you've done in building up culture, in thinking with intention about well-being, and really modeling what it means to foster trust. You now, I think, are in a position where you and your staff can get away from those questions of how will we overcome this, and more towards, here's how we're going to overcome this. And getting away from questions of what's going to happen now to saying, here's what we need to do in this moment and ongoing. So with that said, thank you so much. We welcome other final questions as we have just a few minutes. Nicole, for example, we can build a connection for you to Andrew about some of those surveys. I'm sure he'd be delighted to share. And likewise,
Sure.
with Philip, his own examples from the school district. So we do invite you through the AASA community to keep the conversation going. But in the meantime, let me offer a heartfelt thanks to both of you for your insight, your wisdom, and your insert, and a thank you for your service to the educators and the students that you all care about so much. Really so glad you could be here. And would like to also offer a thanks to our sponsor, CENTEGIX. They are a really interesting company for us to work with because like me as a parent, they as an organization, they believe that every teacher and every student should feel safe every day. And it's through leaders like Philip and Andrew. It's through leaders like those of you on the call here today that make it happen. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Jim. It's been a real pleasure. Good talking to you, Phil.
Sure.
And I think that concludes the official portion of our webinar. Now we're just in the cooling off period. Thanks, everyone, as you sign off. Appreciate your notes, your contributions, and just so glad you could join us today. Phil.